People living in Japan, what are your stories about neckbeards that have visited your country? While visiting Japan, I saw a skinny kid wearing an ahegao sweatshirt on the subway with his parents. For those not in the know, ahegao is the look of girls mid-orgasm giving a happy, generally cross-eyed euphoria-like facial expression. So this sweatshirt is plastered with different girls giving this look. I saw quite a few other people on the train giving this kid disgusted looks. Dude, we had a kid at high school who would wear a full tracksuit of that stuff, sweatshirt and sweatpants. I don't know why administration never said anything to him. Clearly, something was not right there, though he wasn't in any special education programs. Boomers just don't know what a ahegao is. It's just not sexual until you point it out to them. Now I'll never be able to unsee that. The thing is, when something is not seen as sexual, then it's also not seen with malice. I would see those drawings every now and then and think none of it. I just thought those were pictures of girls making funny/silly faces. Yeah, I don't know why, if it looks edgy or something, but it always really weirds me out. Also, WTF parents. I hung out with other foreigners in Osaka via some people I met through Reddit that knew people who were all English teachers. I only met one neckbeard during my solo trip, and he was trying to build his own mini home on some land off the coast or something in Japan. I don't know how, since I heard buying land is next to impossible. He tried hitting on me in my native language. We're both from the US. I got weirded out and left. Then he tried to white knight one of my friends pretty aggressively at a club later that night and went on a drunk rant at her about her leading him on in front of all our friends at 4 a.m. I discussed the parents with my wife, and I just don't know. Like, on one hand, it's not as if you can't tell what that kind of clothes is about. On the other hand, they're really trying to engage their son, who is clearly not fitting in, lashing out, and being edgy in their teenage years. You could try laying the hammer down or try to engage as if they have paying for a trip to Japan and see if it gets them to have a wake-up call. Really, I just don't envy them and the decisions you make at this point. I may not agree with all of the choices, but man, they are trying. Most of the comments on here already said it better than me. The tourist trap districts are what, as the name suggests, attract all of the tourists. The weebs/neckbeards go to Akihabara, the fashion students go to Harajuku, huge letdown, by the way, and the social media tourists flock to Shinjuku because of all the red light district places that were featured on BuzzFeed. I don't really have any stories about anyone in particular. I saw plenty of cringy tourists and people making fools of themselves, especially if it was for the sake of Instagram or YouTube. They'll take up the entire two-way sidewalk in those cases. But for the most part, it was generally limited to those areas. You go to any real tourist destination in Japan and it will almost entirely consist of Japanese people. The country has a lot of wonderful places that are not really advertised to foreigners unless you dig for them. Care to elaborate on the real destinations in Japan? As you said, it's hard unless I dig for it, but I've done a fair amount of digging and I still can't really find what would really be the authentic tourist experience. My wife and I will still go to Shinjuku if only for the Hachiko dog because we love that story, but other than that, I'm at a loss besides the tourist traps. Many cities outside of Tokyo are worth the visit, and are easy to get to thanks to the bullet train. For historical significance, Kyoto is great but can be crowded, especially during Golden Week. I think Hiroshima was also really nice and peaceful, and it had Miyajima nearby, which was wonderful and one of my favorite trips. Awesome food, deer, and great mountain to climb. I never got to visit Okinawa, a bit more out of the way, but I've heard only good things about its beaches. They also have one of the only aquariums with a whale shark, which is a big sell if you want to see one of those. Also, if you are in a city, I recommend looking into catching a baseball game. Japanese baseball is awesome and kind of a throwback to how American baseball was in the 50s. Hiroshima is perhaps my favorite city in Japan, maybe Kobe. Despite the history of the place, the nightlife is great. It's beautiful even by Japan standards, and that far south everyone's a bit chiller. Also hard, agree on Harajuku, the most overrated area of Tokyo. I only go there for the line shop, then go to Ebisu for blackouts. Chiming in as a pre-pandemic, somewhat frequent tourist to Japan, I find Akihabara quite nice to spend a couple of days going around and watching the ebb and flow of people, and besides the big electronics stores there's earphones, which is a haven for all audio-related gear. There's something alluring about all that mess, Relatively speaking, but it does gets tiring after a while. Getting stuck there during a typhoon was quite an eerie experience with everything closed and no one around. But for actual chill on an urban environment, I can't recommend Himeji enough. It is very well connected to many other major cities, especially Osaka and Kyoto, while being way more affordable for lodging, and obviously has an amazing castle and a lot of places to eat and drink. Could you get by as a tourist visiting the lesser-known places without speaking Japanese? As in, will most people understand English? Sure, you can go anywhere in the world and get by. Japan is incredibly unique and absolutely worth visiting. And no, the mass majority of Japanese don't speak any English, and won't speak the little they do due to Japanese perfectionism. I found an effective technique to actually communicate was act a little bewildered and scared when approaching strangers. This goes out the window if they are drunk. Drunk Japanese are a blast. One of my best memories is arriving at the Osaka airport and coming out of the terminal disheveled with a crap-eating grin on my face after a 30-hour flight. 2 locals passed me on the stairs and yelled "Welcome to Japan." It was great. What kind of person am I, who only wants to go to Japan, so I can go nature hiking in the mountain trails, and visit mountain temples? I just want to be in nature, and see beautiful things built in out-of-the-way places where people usually don't go. I just want to go and eat all the food while pointedly ignoring anyone's reactions to surprising quantities I put away due to American. The trick is to eat normal Japanese portions, but at multiple restaurants in a row. F that. I want to see the fear and disgust in their faces as I pack down a 3,000-calorie lunch and ask for dessert in terrible broken Japanese. Watashi wa cheesecake desu. Cheesecake. Nani? This comment got a full giggling fit out of me. Dude, I went to a breakfast place in Tokyo and saw a pair of petite Japanese women pack away an appetizer meant to share with 4 people. As in they, each had one. Then they each had the mountain of pancakes with a tower of whipped cream the place is known for. And that's with whatever fancy drinks they had. I'm sure they had to 2K plus calories for breakfast. I'm a slightly bigger guy and I couldn't even finish just the pancake stack. I wouldn't be surprised if overeating as a going out to eat once in a while treat is out of place there. My wife and I ate there and felt embarrassed that we overordered as the gluttonous Americans that we are, until we saw the mountains of pancakes being brought to the tables around us. That's what I did when I last went there in 2018 during cherry blossom season. I took a lot of day trips, side trips, and overnight trips out of the cities to more rural and nature places, and it was one of the best trips I ever took. Even when I was visiting, I saw tourists really screw up the social etiquette. Not in a bad way, but way too formal in everyday situations. Not really following what the locals were doing. Things like very deep bows for completing a transaction at 7 to 11. So nothing bad, just funny to watch. Honestly, it's pretty hard to know what to do. If the maid in the hotel bows, what kind of bow do you do back? If any? Some things you can't really be taught easily, and I tried to wing it. I just hope everyone realized I was trying my best. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't foreigners expected to give a bow with just their head? That's what I did while I lived there. It's kind of like an aggressive head nod of agreement. Stay long enough and you find yourself doing the mini bow to say thanks to someone for moving to let you off the train. To their back lol. I was only there like 3 weeks and I was bowing at the US custom agents on my way home instinctively like an idiot. I said hey for a good week or 2 after leaving Sweden. Was only there for 6 months, but it became an automatic greeting by the time I left. I remember the day I landed, the customs agent said hey and I, confusingly, say hey. She says hey again, to indicate I should say hey twice, and I looked at her with concern and said hey. Lol. The vast majority will come over and geek out for a week in specific entertainment districts and tourist traps, which is pretty much live and let live for me. Some neckbeard do end up moving to Japan though, and they definitely exist in FOB expat/English teacher circles. That being said, there aren't really any stories that I know of that are particularly noteworthy. Most of them come here, go through culture shock, and realize that Japan isn't all it was cracked up to be, and go home once they have had their fill. Some get stuck in bad marriages / have kids and end up staying in low-paying English teaching jobs for the rest of their lives since they have no other marketable skills / career options, and that lot is pretty sad. A small but notable percentage will break down because of the lack of a social support system / poor mental health care, which is always sad to see as well. Most of them come here, go through culture shock, and realize that Japan isn't all it was cracked up to be, and go home once they have had their fill. The grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. People tend to focus on the positives of another culture while focusing on the negatives of their own culture. Then they travel to this other culture and can't ignore the negative parts anymore, and the culture shock hits them hard and brings back reality. My cousin lived in England for a while, and he basically said you were exchanging your current cultural problems with a different set of cultural problems. Japan specifically have this issue that a lot of people going there were hooked on their cultural exports, failing to realize that the stuff that goes into anime and manga practically goes there because it's not like day-to-day life at all. It's the Western equivalent of moving to LA to be a glamorous movie star. Our escapist pop culture is by definition not the day-to-day experience. Hell, even our glamorous movie stars aren't living like glamorous movie stars with all the sexual harassment, corruption, crazy diets, repetitive interviews, lack of privacy, and struggle to remain relevant longer than 5 years. My point is, everyone is eating crap, and the only way out is to solve the problems in the life you have, and then move on to solving bigger problems that will give you more of what you want. Buying into escapism is just a recipe for new problems you barely even understand. Heck, I even had cultural issues living in the US, from Canada and England. That was a better fit in some ways. The social etiquette / demeanor felt more similar, but harder in others, not really understanding class, education, accents, etc., and the workplace felt more hierarchical and formalized there than here, where ideas seem to be more welcome. The fact that the UK still has a very entrenched class system boggles my mind. Edit, ITT, Americans saying yeah I moved here and it's strange, and British people saying nuh-uh you too. Well, there are still earls and dukes and crap, so it's no wonder. Japan was an awesome place to live, but I don't know if I could stay there permanently. It would really depend on the job and location. The mentality is literally work all the time. There are people eligible to retire who don't retire because they feel society will look down on them if they do. The suicide rate is astronomical. There were a ton of perks to living there, but again, it would really depend on the situation if I was offered to go back permanently. Also, don't fall for the tourist traps if you're in Tokyo. There are better places for merch and games than Akihabara. Harajuku sucks. Just avoid that one. And Shinjuku is fun, but a bit lacking and expensive compared to districts like Ueno. I'll always remember about 15 years ago I was traveling through Europe when an older Japanese man asked if he could practice speaking English with me. I learned that his job was to coach his fellow countrymen on how to be retired, as the transition is so jarring for many it was ruining lives. It blew my mind, but makes sense based on what I know of the culture there. I'll always remember about 15 years ago I was traveling through Europe when an older Japanese man asked if he could practice speaking English with me. I was in Tokyo in 2016 and happened to be around during the Sanya festival. While following the crowds and mikoshi, an older Japanese man wanted to practice his English and used it to explain the festival to me, which was super nice. At the end of the route, the mikoshi follow was all the standard booths with food and games. I got chatting with another older Japanese man who was proud to be able to hammer off all the Canadian provinces, territories, and capital cities of each to me. That's really the best thing about international friends. I've practiced so much Spanish on one of my Mexican friends it's not even funny. We probably need this in the US as well. I know several recently retired people who just sit in their house all day watching cable news, which is literal poison at this point. There's been a saying in the USA for a long time, don't stop moving when you retire or you'll stop moving forever. You have to have something to do in retirement to be healthy. Bear Bryant was considered the greatest American football coach ever during his life. He was one of the overall greatest American football coaches in general. After his last game, he was asked what he'd do during retirement. He replied, probably croak in a week. To his credit, he lasted 4 weeks. That's why Joe Paterno wouldn't retire. Then he kind of had to, despite the Penn State cult having his back, and then he died. I have a friend who I met online through anime that lives in Japan and works at one of the manga shops around Akihabara. According to him, lots of English-speaking foreigners come in and make a huge obnoxious deal about the lolicon section in the shop. Like he pretty much expects it at this point if he sees someone non-Asian come in that they will go straight to that area and start snickering and sneaking pictures with their group. Technically photography isn't allowed, but he doesn't like confronting them about it after a few bad experiences, so he just pretends not to notice. He still groans about the "Don't Lewd the Lolly Dragon" memes a few years ago, since they always had kana books on display due to popularity, and it was like a giant beacon to tourists to be obnoxious. They also bought those books in particular more than any Japanese did. The Japanese customers mask up and say nothing. Just a minor thing I've learned. When I lived in Japan in the 1990s, my Japanese friend took me to a condom kiosk in Tokyo, which was supposed to be shocking and edgy. It just had lots of different types of condoms in novelty colors, which was cool, but to me it wasn't shocking. Some of the magazines and manga sold in convenience stores, however. I remember seeing a cigarette vending machine on the side of the road once. That was pretty shocking, just the idea that any kid could just buy cigarettes without an adult even having to talk to them. Where was that? In Germany, they have these too, and you can only pay with your debit card, so that it automatically means you're over 18. I still found it super weird, but it makes sense. Just a minor thing I've learned. Well, why is there a lolicon section? Supply and demand. She sells seashells by the seashore. If it didn't sell, they wouldn't have. Joe Public has a taste, and faceless publishers going to get money from them with it. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to be the first to know about Red Rabbit Reader's new videos. If you like our videos, please like them on YouTube and share them with your friends. We welcome your comments below. Press to start another of our videos.